Who owns the money in your bank account? This small question has profound implications. According to a survey by Ipso Mori, over 70% of people in the UK believe that when they deposit money with the bank, it is theirs, but it is not. Money deposited in a bank account is, as established under case law going back over 200 years, legally property of banks rather than account holders. Were any honourable members this afternoon to deposit £100 at their bank, or rather improbably, if IPSA were to manage to do so on any member's account, the bank would then be free to lend on approximately £97 of that £100. Even with the new capital ratio requirements coming in, the bank could lend on over 90% of what you deposit. Indeed, Bank A could then lend on £97 of the initial £100 deposit to another bank, Bank B, who could then lend on 97% of the value. Round and round the lending would go until, as we saw at the height of the credit boom, for every £1 deposited, banks had piled up over £40 worth of accumulated credit of one form or another. Banks, in other words, Mr. Speaker, today enjoy a form of legal privilege that extends to no other area of business that I'm aware of. And it is a form of legal privilege. I'm sure that some honourable members, in full compliance with IPSA rules, I'm certain, may have rented a flat. I'm sure that honourable members don't need me, or indeed IPSA, to explain that having rented a flat, it is not generally allowed to then sublet that flat onto someone else. Try doing that and your landlord would most likely eject you. So why then are banks allowed to sublet your money many times over without your consent? My bill would give account holders legal ownership of their deposits unless they indicated otherwise when opening the account. There would, in other words, henceforth be two categories of bank account: deposit-taking accounts for investment purposes and deposit-taking accounts for storage purposes. Banks would remain at liberty to lend on money deposited in the investment accounts, but not the storage accounts. As such, this idea is not a million miles away from the idea of 100% gilt-backed storage accounts proposed by other honourable members and by the Governor of the Bank of England. My bill is not just a consumer protection measure, however. It also aims to remove a curious legal exemption for banks, which has profound implications across the whole economy. Precisely because they are able to treat your deposit as an investment in a giant credit pyramid, banks are able to conjure up credit. In most industries, when demand for something rises, businesses in that sector produce more of it in response. The legal privilege extended to banks prevents that basic market mechanism from working, with disastrous consequences. As I shall explain, if the market mechanism worked as it should, once demand for credit started to increase in an economy, banks would raise the price of credit, interest rates, in order to encourage more saving. More folk would save as a result, as rates rose. That would allow banks to extend credit in proportion to savings. Were they like any other business, when demand for what they supply lets rip, banks would be constrained in their ability to supply credit by the pricing mechanism. Not so, alas, with our system of fractional reserve banking. Able to treat your money as their own, banks can carry on lending against it without necessarily raising the price of credit. The pricing mechanism does not rein in the growth in credit as it should. Unrestrained by this pricing mechanism, we therefore get credit bubbles. To satisfy runaway demand for credit, banks produce great candy floss piles of the stuff. The sugar rush feels great for a while, but that sugar rush credit creates an expansion in capacity in the economy that is not backed by real savings. It is not justified in terms of someone else's deferred consumption, so the credit boom creates unsustainable overconsumption. Policymakers, not least in this chamber, regardless of who has been in office, have then had to face the unenviable choice between letting the edifice of crony capitalism come crashing down, with calamitous consequences for the rest of us, or printing off more real money to shore up this Ponzi scheme and the people who built it, and in doing so devalue our currency to keep the pyramid afloat. Since the credit crunch hit us, an endless succession of economists, most of whom I note didn't see the crunch coming, have popped up on our TV screens to explain its causes with great authority. Most have tended to see the lack of credit as the problem, rather than as a symptom. Perhaps instead we should now begin to listen to those economists who saw the credit glut that preceded the crash as the problem. the Cobden Centre, the von Mises Institute, Herta de Soto, they all grasped that it was the overproduction of bogus candy floss credit before the crunch that gave rise to the credit crunch. It's time to take seriously their ideas on honest money and sound banking. Now, the Keynesian monetarist economists might recoil in horror at the idea. Their orthodoxy holds that without these legal privileges for banks, there would be insufficient credit. The oil that keeps the engine of capitalism working, they say, would dry up. The machine would grind to a halt. Not so. Under my bill, credit would still exist, but it would be credit backed by savings. In other words, it would be credit that could fuel an expansion in economic capacity that was consummate with savings or deferred consumption. It would be, to use the cliché of our day, sustainable. Ministers have spoken of their lofty ambition to rebalance the economy from one based on consumption to one founded on producing things. A good place to begin might be to allow a law that permits storage bank accounts, which do not permit banks to mass produce phony credit in a way that ultimately favours consumers and debtors over those who create wealth. With honest money, instead of being a nation of indebted consumers that we have become, Britons might become again the producers and savers that we once were. With a choice between the new storage accounts and investment accounts, no longer would private individuals find themselves co-opted as unwilling, indeed unaware, investors in madcap deals in credit instruments few of the bank's own boards seem to even understand.